Hello and welcome to Chicken Chats. We're so glad you're here. We're excited to talk all things chicken with you today. We have some very special guests. My name is Brittany Sweeney. I'm with the Livestock Conservancy. I'm the communications manager. And here with me today is Jeanette Behringer, our poultry expert and senior program manager. And also today we have Aharon Sason. I hope that's how I said your name right. We're so excited to hear you talk about chickens and the Presidio and all the work that you do. Do you want to say a little bit more about what you do?
Yes. Hi. So my profession is zooarchaeology. It combines zoo and archaeology together. So we study animal bones that come from archaeological sites. We study various sites from various periods. Here in San Diego, we divide them into two: the prehistoric ones, that's related to the indigenous people, the Kumeyaay people, mostly here in San Diego, but also in other parts of California. And we also study historical sites, which here in California start with the San Diego Presidio, was the first European occupation in all the west coast of North America. Not including, of course, Mexico, because it was occupied before, but west coast of North America, of United States today. Historic and historic, and the study that we did with the chicken bones was historical sites, obviously, from the Presidio.
Yeah, I'm really excited because I'm actually a paleontology geek and dinosaur nut, and to connect my love of livestock and dinosaurs and all this crazy work that's going on. I wanted to take it back a notch because when I tell people about what you're doing out there, the first question everybody says is, what's a Presidio? Because that's something that we don't use here in the East Coast.
Right. So the Presidio was a military Spanish garrison, military occupation. At some point, it was a military fortress in San Diego with built walls, and people lived within those walls. So it was a military garrison, but the people who lived in the Presidio were not only military personnel; they had their families. They got married here. They had Native American people working in the Presidio and living in the Presidio. So it was a mixed population.
Mm-hmm. And how did this one actually get started? How did it come to be in San Diego?
Right. So the Spanish occupation existed in Mexico before 1769. And we know from historical records there were concerns in the Spanish government about Russian and British advancement to California, and they decided to get ahead and establish what they called New Spain. So California was in the beginning what they called New Spain, and they decided to build a series of military garrisons along the coast, the west coast. The first one was San Diego. Then they built several more in Santa Barbara, in Monterey, in other places in California. But San Diego Presidio was the first ever, as I said, European occupation settlement in the west coast of the United States. Yeah.
Okay. And besides chickens, which we'll definitely get into in depth, you found some other livestock remains there. What other kind of livestock was kept there?
So here's the thing, when we started our study, it was focused on chicken. But we know for sure, also from historical documents, and also because other studies has been done in the Presidio in previous decades, that cattle was the main livestock animal. We know from historical documents that they had a lot of sheep, some goats, pig, of course. We found in our assemblages remains of turkey and geese as well.
Wow.
Because our study was focused mainly on chicken, there is kind of a bias because we were not looking for the larger animals. So that's why the chicken in our assemblages are in higher numbers. But this is because we looked for them more than.
Well, and it's because it is all about the chicken after
correct.
all. You know?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. I loved your presentation, and I hope we can share the link. The first chicken burrito in Western North America,
Right.
which goes through some of the extraordinary findings. And you know, first and foremost, finding chickens, period, is pretty rare in early colonial digs. Can you talk about why what you found was so extraordinary?
So first, we have quite a few firsts. It's the first European settlement, as I mentioned. It's the first study. Believe it or not, I'm in the field of zoology for quite a few decades. There hasn't been any study on comprehensive study on chicken remains. It has been done quite prevalently in Europe, in the Middle East, but not here. So we were the first to publish, as I said, comprehensive study on the chicken remains. And yeah, so that's the main two firsts that our contribution to science and research.
And can you talk a little about, you didn't find just one kind of chicken, you found a couple of different kinds of chickens. That's where I was kind of blown away, but it made sense to me. But can you talk a little bit about that?
That was an absolute surprise for us. We were working on the chicken, and we measure all the bones that we measurable bones that we study and analyze. And I noticed at some point, you know, I had very little knowledge about chicken before I started this study. And when I was working on this chicken, I noticed that there were bones that look very similar to chicken bones. They were much smaller. And when I was working in the lab, and I had no clue about bantam, I admit, I didn't know about bantam chicken, and I called them pony chickens. When I was in the lab, I said, "Oh, looks like a chicken, but it's smaller," and I called them pony chicken. And then, after we finished our lab work, I went to the literature, and then I found out, oh, there is a smaller breed, very similar to the standard breed, just smaller. By the way, it's smaller in length. It's not as smaller in the width of the bones. So the width of the bones were only slightly smaller than the female chicken, but with the length of the bones. And I'll try and share the presentation later and show you some photos of those bones. We learned that they're smaller, shorter. And as I said, when I was doing the lab work, I was calling them pony chicken, and then I realized that there is this bantam chicken. And I'm almost convinced that those are bantam chickens. In archaeology, it's hard to be 100% positive about things because we are making scientific assumptions and theorizing about this. However, we are, I think with your help, Jeanette, we made contact with this group in New Zealand, and we're going to send our chicken bones, some of their chicken bones, to their ancient DNA lab, and hopefully we will be able to confirm that our smaller, the pony chickens that I called, are actually bantam chickens. So that was an absolute surprise. However, again, after I finished the lab work and I went to the literature, I did find mention of smaller chicken in Florida, 16th century Florida. And I think in a couple other sites, but there is only mention or postulation by the researchers. They didn't do any study or any measurement or any statistical analysis. So as I said, our study is the most comprehensive and actually prove statistically that it's very likely that we have two breeds of chicken. Shall I try and share, and I'll show you how we got to this conclusion. I'm going to try and share the screen again.
Absolutely.
The presentation. And for some reason, again, my presentation doesn't show up. I'm going to close it and reopen it.
Yeah, I found the bantam chickens particularly interesting, and in talking with some of my colleagues in Barcelona, friends with a group of chicken guys out there, and they said it was really common to use bantam chickens to hatch the eggs of the larger birds. And
that's interesting.
And that there were very specific breeds of bantams that were created for the sole purpose of hatching eggs. And like I work with Crevecoeur chickens, and they're non-sitting birds. They lay a lot of eggs, and birds that lay a lot of eggs don't tend to want to sit on them. And that's where the bantam would come in. And I've been told that later on, people started using turkeys a lot, but turkeys also can be really seasonal. So if you wanted to hatch eggs year round, if you've got a good bantam, they're broody all the time. So, it could be that's what they were being used for, because bantams are typically good mothers, good broodies, and that could be the reason why they were there, because they certainly didn't have incubators at the time.
Thank you so much for this information. I wasn't aware of that. I am going to jump on it after our chat. This is fascinating. I know that they are sometimes used as pets, and because they're compact, it's much more efficient. You can get more chicken in a smaller space or backyard. But I wasn't aware of the hatching factor, which is very interesting.
Yeah, we actually have a bantam on our conservation priority list called the Nankin bantam. And years ago, I kept them. And they were one of the broodiest things I ever worked with. And the only reason the Nankin exists today is because they were kept by gamekeepers to hatch out quail and pheasant eggs. And because they're not particularly glamorous chickens, but what they are is extraordinary banty brooders. And I can connect you with my buddies in Barcelona, because they know a lot about the old bantam breeds that we used as broodies in Spain.
Please, I would be happy to. This is fascinating. So that was a great discovery. I'm not able to see my presentation, unfortunately.
Well, we'll make sure we share the link with everybody so they can see it. And for you, those of you out there, really watch the YouTube video. It's a lot of fun if you're a chicken geek. And one thing I really loved is you talk about how you identified egg-laying chickens.
Right.
And, I've seen the same thing that they're doing now with dinosaurs to identify reproductively active female dinosaurs, the same exact way you did with your chickens. Can you talk about that?
Yes, of course. So while we were working on the chicken bones, I'm because of my profession, aware, we call it medullary bone. So this is what happens with many of birds and reptiles, hence dinosaurs, that chicken or egg-laying birds or reptiles, before they start forming the eggshells, they cannot do this straight from their blood system. So they transfer calcium from their blood system into their hollow bones, long bones for the most part. And those long bones can be filled with substance which is doesn't look like a bone. It's a velvety, more softer material, but it fills out sometimes the whole bone with this what we call medullary bone. And from there, they started forming their eggshells. So with chicken, we know that medullary bone starts forming about 2 weeks before the first egg first egg is laid, and it resorbs this calcium or medullary bone resorbs back to the blood system after the chicken finished laying the eggs. So we have a time period in archaeology that if we're lucky enough and we look into those bones, we can see this velvety material. So if it was at the peak, the bone will be filled with this medullary bone, with this velvety material. However, sometimes depends on if just started forming the medullary bone or just ending the medullary bone, then we'll see just a thin layer within the cavity of the bone, which we can recognize as a medullary bone. And this tells us two important things in archaeology. In archaeology, in zooarchaeology, in my field, it's very difficult to tell males from females. So with the chicken bones, we did various analysis. One of them, we looked for bone spurs, but we found none. And this is not an exception. There are oftentimes we don't see bone spurs on males. Sometimes females produce bone spurs. So that method is kind of confusing. The other method that we use is measuring the bones, as I mentioned earlier. And there is a strong sexual dimorphism between males and chicken, males and females with chicken. Males obviously are larger. And with statistical modeling that we use, we could separate what we think based on the measurements are females and what are males based on the size. And I'll tell you later about the ratio between males and females. Then we looked into those bones and looked for medullary bone, and we started finding a lot of them. And which tells us, again, we need to be lucky in archaeology because this is a limited time frame where we can see it. If we find the chicken bone not in the egg-laying period, we see a hollow bone, and if we don't have a complete bone, then we cannot measure it, and then we cannot tell male from female. But when we find a medullary bone in a chicken bone, we can tell 100% for sure, and this is, as I said, rare in archaeology, to tell 100%, not a statistical modeling, but biologically, this bone belongs to a female. And the other great advantage is we can tell it's a laying female. And we found, as I said, we found them in large numbers. At some point, the bone preservation in the Presidio was very good. We found many complete bones. And we asked permission from the city who they're responsible for all the findings from the Presidio to have to cut those bones into two after photographing them and measuring them and all of that, and look into those bones. And we found more medullary bone within those bones. So we could tell easily that those bones belonged to female. There were laying females, and the ratio between males and females, based on our measurements and based on our medullary bone analysis, was about 1 to 12. And actually, sorry, I apologize, 1 to 9. And when we looked at historical documents, well, we found only one mention of one of the fathers who was doing inventory on one of the presidios in Mexico, actually, and he mentions that the ratio between males and females was, he says, there are 2 roosters on 18 hens, which brings us again to 1:9 ratio. We found it from analytical procedures, and here we have historical documents that actually bring us straight to this number again, which is was very gratifying to find that our analysis coincide with historical data that we found.
Well, and it coincides with today too. When you're
Correct.
setting up a breeding flock, that's about what you're doing, like 1 to 9 or 10 birds. More than that, then you might not have everybody getting bred. So it sounds
Correct.
like they had nice little breeding flocks there, and the breeding ratio really hasn't changed all that much. And can you tell me, you had some findings about the way the birds were consumed. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we know they had laying birds, but they must have had, I mean, what did they do with all the extra cockerels? So do you have any thoughts on consuming meat?
Yes. So I'll set the background for you, and it's very interesting. It actually brings us to current days in a way. The Presidios, when they were established, the goal of the Spanish government that they will be independent economically. However, they were not. And they, in the first few decades of the existence of the Presidio, they used to get supplies from Mexico via the Pacific Ocean into San Diego. So they were relying on food that came from Mexico. And there are historical documents that they are complaining the food arrives rotten, they are starving, they're complaining that they haven't had meat for months, and they were in a terrible, obviously physical and economical situation. Our thought is, this is I consider it as really important discovery, is one of the only ways for this population I need to add another thing. After a few decades, the Presidios were separated from the civilian population and the military population. This is where the missions were established. So after about 20 years of the, after 10 years of the Presidio existence, it was split. And a mission of San Diego was built few miles east to the San Diego Presidio, which was watching the San Diego Presidio was built on a hill overlooking the San Diego Bay, so they could see all the ships that coming in. They could control the San Diego River. They were on top of the San Diego River. And a few, as I said, about a decade later, it was split and the San Diego Mission was built. And San Diego Mission, at some point, was the major supplier. After a few decades, the San Diego Missions established themselves economically. They were able to raise their own cattle, sheep, goats, pig, and barley and wheat, and they were the main provider of food to the Presidio, which, as I said, was mainly military personnel, where they were obviously occupied in their duties, so they couldn't do bringing food to the table. However, we keep reading about their complaints about inconsistent provisioning to the Presidio. And we think that the chicken was their main anchor. They were raised in their backyards in the Presidio, and they didn't have to rely on anyone for that. So they were raising their own chicken. They had their proteins and meat and eggs, and they get their supplies from the mission. But the chicken were the only reliable source of food. They could go out to the backyard and get maybe not as much as they wanted. Actually, in later years of the Presidio, we hear that the Presidio was also providing sheep and eggs to ships that anchored in San Diego Bay. So at some point, they were able to establish themselves and actually probably provide chickens and eggs for money for the families in the Presidio. And I remind you again that people in the Presidio were not only military personnel; they had families and kids, and Native Americans as well. So there was a mixed community, and they had to feed themselves. So chickens were the only reliable source. And when we looked at we can age bones of different animals, livestock animals for sure, but also wild animals. There are a few methods. I'm not going to bore you with this, but one of them is um, all mammals, our bones fuse while we grow. So our bones are um, constitute three elements: the main long shaft of the bone, then there is the ends, the articular ends that attach to the bone. And because we want to allow the bone to grow, they are not attached until we reach adulthood. This is true for people, but it's also true for all other mammals. And also birds and reptiles and other families of animals. So we can tell, if we know the sequence, when those bones reach or these animals reach adulthood, we can tell the age of the bones. Not age, chronological age, but to what age this bone fused. If it fused in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, this is when the chicken reached adulthood. So we did analysis of the age composition of all the chicken that we found, and we found about 25% of the chicken were young individuals, chicks, and the rest were adults. And we also did what we call butchery analysis and a body part representation. So we looked at the different body parts, and our conclusion is yes, most males during the first few months were slaughtered, were killed, and those were the meat providers. And this is where they established the ratio of, say, 1 to 10, one female to, 10 females to one male. And the rest were killed and consumed for food.
Were they killed like around 3 months of age, 4 months of age? About that?
Up to 6 months.
Up to 6 months?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. And it's still, the same today. After they're 6 months old, they start to get a little bit tough.
Right.
And yeah, so it's like, this is just so cool. Yeah, and you talked about Native Americans living in and around the Presidio. Do you have any idea on what tribes were there, and did they actually own livestock, or were they just keeping them, or do you have any sense of that at all? Did they have their own chickens?
I must say I don't. Within the Presidio, I don't. We don't have any documentation that talk about that. The native tribe in San Diego is the Kumeyaay people, and as I said, we studied many of their prehistoric sites as well. And by the way, we didn't find any chicken bones on those sites. We didn't find any of the ancestors of the chicken, the red jungle fowl. So we know for sure that the chicken was not native and was brought to the Presidio, probably from Europe to Mexico and from Mexico to San Diego. So we know that they lived there. We know that they were buried there in the Presidio, the Native Americans. But I don't think at that point of time they were allowed or they could raise their own animals within the Presidio. I'm convinced, and I'm not 100% about that because sure about that because I haven't studied that. But later on, obviously, they did raise their own livestock, and that was their main source of food. I'll tell you actually another anecdote. My lab partner, Susan Arter, was studied the chicken bones with me, studied a site in Old Town, San Diego. So when the Presidio was established in 1769, and in about 1835, it was abandoned. The people from the Presidio went down the hill and established Old Town San Diego in the 1830s and 40s. Susan Arter studied one of those components in Old Town, and surprisingly, we were expecting to find mostly cattle and sheep and pig. With that, and those were the vast majority of the bones that we found there, we found also a lot of small mammals in Old Town. And our interpretation is that while the Europeans kept their own diet with beef and pork and lamb, the Native Americans that worked in Old Town kept their old diet, and their habits were catching small mammals, rabbits, wood rats, gophers, squirrels, and that's were their main food. So we think that even though when they're, for instance, were working in Old Town, and we're talking about the earliest part of the 19th century, the Native Americans kept their old habits of food, but I'm sure that later on, when they were allowed to, and I'm saying allowed because they were not allowed to do many of the things that the European settlers could. When they were allowed to do that, they probably were raising their own livestock as well.
Mm-hmm. I find this just all so fascinating, and
it is. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just geeking out. That's I'm like, wow. Brittany, do we have any questions from the audience?
We do. We have a bunch of comments today. Let's see. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for joining us today. Lisa says, Happy Tuesday here in Kenai, Alaska. That's so exciting. Thanks for tuning in. And she lived in San Diego 7 years, so that's super exciting. But you know all about the Presidio and are learning even more, same as us. Somebody from the office says, sounds like some of the bones could be genetic dwarfs, just as in mammals. There are two types of dwarfism. One is a true miniature, and the other, the long bones, are shortened.
Hopefully, our DNA study will prove us either right or wrong, and I'm happy to get any answer. I just want the answer. So we'll figure this out in a few months. Actually, we're hoping to get the bones to New Zealand and get the results, and I'm happy to share that the results with you.
Yeah, we're real excited about that. This lab that we're working with in New Zealand has done a lot of work with chickens in the New World, and they were one of the first labs working to identify whether or not the chickens came from Europe or came from Polynesia. And so they're very excited because this gives them another insight into early chicken cultivation in America. And we also have connected with a Choctaw dig in the Tennessee Valley, and they've found chicken eggs at that dig. And so we're trying to find out if they can get DNA from the inside of the eggshell. But they too have found some other livestock like cattle and geese and I believe pigs. The pigs are another one we're interested in. And interestingly, a lot of the animals we think they had, both in California and Alabama, are breeds that the Livestock Conservancy works with that are still around today. You know, the Spanish cattle are represented in breeds like our Piney Woods and our Texas Longhorns, and our Florida cracker cattle, and the sheep, could be a churro type sheep like the Navajo churros. And so what I find so fascinating is connecting this history in particular with the animals that are still alive today. It's just they're really rare, but that's why we're around, is to conserve these animals. But finding a piece of their history like this that we weren't aware of is just thrilling. And we're real excited to learn. We just learn more and more every year. Just when you think you know something, it takes us in another direction. And so what do you see in the future of the dig? What things are you hoping to study or come out of your future work? I take it you're going to be there a while?
Yes. I call the Presidio the Machu Picchu of San Diego. However, it's a most preserved Spanish settlement in California. However, after the 1990s, they seized all excavations of the Presidio and they backfilled it. So now the Presidio Hill in San Diego is mostly grass and concrete, unfortunately. And my vision for the Presidio is one day to find enough funding to reopen those places that were excavated. There are 400 or 500 banker boxes with material from previous excavations that haven't been analyzed at all. So our hope is first to, from our perspective, is to put our hands on as many animal bones from the Presidio and provide more comprehensive analysis for the chicken, but also for the other species that we find there. As I said, we find remains of geese and turkey, definitely the cow and the pig, and for instance, I'm very curious to see what was the ratio between sheep and goats. Were there goats there or not? This is something that we can do, but we need to find the funding for that. That's going to be a major endeavor to get this. First, as I said, excavating the parts that were already excavated, and then analyzing the material, and then excavating the parts that were not excavated, and then opening the Presidio as I said, as the Machu Picchu. I would say not of San Diego, of California, actually, as in one of the major important colonial sites. As I said, actually now I'm expanding to all North America. I think it's going to be very, very. San Diego Presidio is a Jamestown of the West Coast, if you want. So yes, that's my hope. As I said, I think the major thing would be funding. And once we get there, we will be able to analyze so much material. We have glass and metal and ceramics from various kinds that hasn't been analyzed, hasn't been studied, and that will shed much more light on as I said, the first European settlement. So that would be very interesting.
Wow, that's extraordinary. It really is. It kind of blows your mind that the stuff's never been looked at. I just can't fathom why it wouldn't have up until now, but it's like it does sound like a treasure trove to dive into, though.
It is. I'll share with you. I'm sure most of the audience are not archaeologists, but this is known problem with archaeology. They go in the field, they excavate. It's much fun. I love it. But then the material takes much more time to analyze, and oftentimes either move to another project or there is lack of funding, and they sit in banker boxes and waiting for the right people to come analyze them. So I know this from all over the world. It happens, and hopefully one day we will be able to get there.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any more questions, Britt?
Yeah, we have a couple. Let's see. Hi, Jean. Good to see you. Thanks for tuning in today. And then Karina, thanks for joining us today. We're so glad you're here. Karina wants to know, Jeanette, why is knowing a breed's history important for conservation of heritage breeds?
Well, I think, you know, it puts the animals into a context that people don't really think about, and how important a lot of these breeds that no one's ever heard of was part of, you know, for instance, building this country, or you know, it's the stories that really grab people and get people excited and captivated about those stories. And when you start caring about something like that, whether it starts with an interesting history, it really helps to get people to think about the animals that we have here and now. And geez, why, you know, we need to save these animals. They've been here for what, 500 years. And I think these stories go a long way to, you know, helping people understand that we're culturally linked to these animals, and it's quite a long history. And I mean, we're just babies here in you know, in the United States. Some of the breeds in Asia and Africa go back thousands of years with those cultures, and I think it's our responsibility to dig up these histories and be able to connect them, because you know, the animals' histories didn't just start, you know, in the 17 or 1800s. It goes beyond, you know, before that. And so I think it just goes a long way in getting people to care even more about why we need to conserve these animals. So yeah, I'm super excited to see what the DNA brings up. And yeah, I'm telling you, my Spanish colleagues are biting their fingernails, because they're putting money on it being some kind of Mediterranean breed of chicken. And
I would love to learn about it.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of the Mediterraneans were very thrifty and could lay a lot of eggs with very little feed. And so, you know, that's why they're so useful, and you know, just really great stuff. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come and visit with us. And this has been an extraordinary talk for me. Again, I'm a history geek, so
I have the presentation that I can show you a few slides if you would like. I was able to bring it up. Would you like to?
Yeah, let's try and get that up if we can.
And
pulling that up, I'm just going to say, hi, Summer. Thanks for joining us today. She says livestock in general are the unsung heroes of people's survival. And that's true. So thank you. All right, let's see. I see your screen. There we are. Perfect.
Okay, let me. I want to second Jeanette for what she said. While it's not really about breeds or conservation of breeds, I would like to link the past to present. Our conclusion to our article, we raved about chickens. They are the most efficient livestock animal. They produce, for what they ingest, are 3 to 3 times more efficient than pigs with meat production. They're 4 to 6 times more efficient than cattle and sheep. Let me get so they need a relatively low amount of water to produce. So one chicken needs about 3,500 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of meat. Cattle need 50,000 liters to produce 1 kilogram of meat. So chickens were the most efficient and still the most efficient livestock animal that we know. And when we were, as I said, in the conclusion of our article, we were raving about the advantages of chicken. They were used in their backyards for pest control. They required very little labor, could be cared by the women and children, while the men were the soldiers and busy with their military duties. So that an animal that could be easily uh, um, raised and maintained. Then we talked about the fact that chicken helped in developing countries. We know this day in Africa and in other places when there were disasters. Chicken, organization would provide those poor families that went through either a war or other biological disaster, provided them with chicken, and within few months they were able to establish a reliable, as I mentioned, source of food until they find more work and so on. And I'll tell you an anecdote. Once a paper is accepted for publication, we cannot make any changes to the paper. However, our paper was accepted right when the pandemic started, actually last year, a year ago. And then I noticed in the news that people started acquiring chicken. They could not go to the supermarket. They did not have a reliable source of food provisioning because of the shutdown. So people started acquiring chicken and raising them in their backyard. And that was bingo. I mean, this is exactly what happened to the Presidio 252 years ago. And it's happening again now when you don't have a reliable source of food. You raise your chicken in your backyard and you have a reliable source of food. So this is where, so we wrote to the editor and asked, can we please, besides all the advantages that we mentioned of chicken, we want to mention the pandemic. And we were allowed to add this word to our article and say that in times of pandemic, like the time that we are experiencing right now, chicken, and you can check the news, you can do Google News. I'll show you one copy of the article in my presentation, that people started acquiring chicken in huge numbers in the last year to have a reliable source of meat and eggs in their backyard rather in the supermarket that they don't know if they can get there anytime soon.
Yeah, as a chicken breeder myself, I can tell you I cannot produce enough chicks. This past year was crazy.
Right.
People calling me up left and right. All of our hatchery friends, they were sold out of so many things. And, you know, in talking to our friends at Tractor Supply, people got downright irate that they couldn't get chicks. And this year, they're saying the same thing's going to happen, that there's still a chicken craze and people are now getting used to getting their own chickens and eggs. So this is going to be a very big year for the hatcheries again.
Right. So here we go. And we can get perspective on the present by looking at the past. So here's another advantage of why we want, as I said, maybe not this particular breeds, but we learn a lot from the past and we can project it to the future. I'll show you a quick slide of the location of the Presidio. Can you see my mouse?
No.
No, but you see do you see the map of the Presidio? It's located on the mouth of San Diego River, and it's watching the San Diego Bay. This is development of the Presidio in various years. As I said, at some point it was a fortified military occupation, and at some point it was even the capital of the state of California. Not the state of California, but of California. So this is what I was telling you about the statistical analysis that we did about measurements of the chicken. And as you can see, when we did the statistical modeling based on the width of the bones, the model detected only two groups, females and males.
I don't think we see the bone picture. I'm still seeing the Presidio location.
Okay. How about now?
Mixture analysis?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yes. Okay, so this is where you see that, as I said, this is where we measure the width of the bones. And this is the statistical model detected only two groups of populations. And we obviously assume that were females and males, and the ratio between the females and males was 1 to 12. However, when we put the length of the bones into statistical modeling, we notice that there are three groups, males, females, and far to the left, smaller group of the smaller breed. In this case, the male-female ratio was 1 to 5. So this is how we detected and thought that we have a probably smaller breed of chicken.
Pony chicken.
Pony chickens. Can you see the picture of the bones right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so here, those that are marked with an arrow are the bantam chickens. And you see that they are very similar in shape. Their width is very similar to the standard chicken. However, they are much shorter.
Mm-hmm.
And I will show you the medullary bone that we were talking about. On the right, you see a typical bird bone. It's hollow. And on the left, you see one of our examples, the best examples, where the bone is filled with medullary bone. So as I said, this bone can be, we can say for 100% positiveness that it is female, and it was an egg-laying female. And as I said, quite a few of our bones were complete. So we cut them into half, and you can see here there is a thin layer of velvety material within the cavity of the bone. And in this case, we could tell also that it is medullary bone belongs to a female and egg-laying female. Can you see the velvety material within the cavity?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is some of the marks that we found on the bones, and we, as I said, we did a whole analysis of that, and I think that would be, yeah, those are the pictures that I wanted to show you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's been a thrill, and I really look forward to further collaboration with you. And my last question is the Presidio dig open to the public, or where can the public keep up with what you're doing? Do you have a website that people can go to see the latest?
Yes, we do have a website for our lab. We don't post updates on our Presidio research. Currently, it's on hold until we find additional funding for that. The Presidio Hill is a great place to visit, but as I said, unfortunately, right now, you can have a picnic there, but you won't see any of the remains of the fortress. They're all under the grass. They are preserved. And one day they will be back to life, but currently they're under grass and concrete, but it's a nice place to visit. Nice view, but yeah, and there are some signs there, and you can figure out the contour of the fortress, but that's about it for now. Okay. When it becomes a Machu Picchu of California, I will let you know for sure.
Yeah, the heck with Disneyland. Everybody's going to go to the Presidio.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. Right. here's your website to the lab where Aaron works, and they talk about all the great things that y'all are doing, which is wonderful. So big thank you to you for joining us today, and big thank you to all of our members and supporters who make programs like Chicken Chats possible. We appreciate you. If you're not a member and you would like to become one, let us know. We would love to hook you up. As Ryan says, it's only $4 a month. So that is the end of my shameless plug for the Livestock Conservancy.
Well, thanks so much. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to what happens in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Yeah.
Have a great one, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Join us again next week.
Bye.